I'm Jerry Bird, president of Baltimore Sister Cities. For those of you not familiar, BSC is a nonprofit volunteer organization that promotes mutual economic development, educational, cultural, health, and environmental and other cooperation and exchanges between Baltimore City, Maryland, and our international sister cities. I'd like to first thank all of you for joining us tonight for this very necessary and important webinar this evening in support of our Asian American Pacific Islander communities. Our BSC Diversity webinar series is highly focused on issues and challenges that are important to the city of Baltimore. And tonight, in response to the increasing violence against the AAPI communities, we are proud to host this event in partnership with the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs and the Asian Arts and Culture Center of Towson University. I'd like to graciously thank our speaker panelists tonight for joining us, and they are Delegate Mark Chang, Maryland State House of Delegates, Christina Poi from the Maryland Governor's Commissions on APA and SAA Affairs, Dana Moore, Baltimore City Chief Equity Officer, Linda Kato from the Society of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and Nerissa Paglinauan, Program Manager at Towson University's Asian Arts and Culture Center. Next, I'd like to introduce, and you've heard a couple words from her just now, our BSc colleague, Dr. Teresa Leslie, Vice Chair of the Baltimore Rotterdam Committee, who will serve as our moderator this evening. Teresa is an anthropologist, community engagement specialist, and educator. Her particular expertise lies in public global health and well-being, sustainable development and the environment, and especially as it relates to underserved populations in both national and international contexts. Thanks, Teresa.
Thank you for the introduction, Jerry. And just some housekeeping notes for, before we really get started. So we're gonna have the speakers speak first and then have questions afterwards. And we invite you at that time to put your questions for the speakers in the Q&A, which is located at the bottom of your screen. So you just have to click on that and you'll see the Q&A windows. And we ask that if you have comments, not questions, to just drop that in the chat. So let's get right into the program. Our first speaker is Linda Kato, and she is a senior consultant for Society of the Sacred Heart, US Canada Province. Linda Kato is a member of the Society of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, an international order of Catholic nuns with a global mission of education for human development and social justice. And before you start, Linda, I see that the mayor, Mayor Scott, has joined us. So Jerry, would you like to introduce the mayor? You're muted, Jerry.
Well, hello and welcome, Mr. Mayor, everyone. We are joined tonight by a very special guest who is the most fearless leader in Baltimore City, a man that has for all of his career worked tirelessly to end gun violence, restore our public's trust in government, and change Baltimore for the better ever since he was first elected as city councilman for Baltimore's 2nd District back in 2011. In May of 2019, he was elected unanimously to become our city's council president. And in December of 2020, he became the 52nd mayor of Baltimore City with a heavy lift for change and transparency. Since his first day in office, he has emerged as a leading voice in reducing violence in Baltimore, of which he believes requires a holistic, all hands on deck approach, one that understands violence as a fundamental public health issue. And so without further ado, please help me to extend a very warm welcome to Baltimore City's Mayor, Mayor Brandon M. Scott. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Jerry, and it's good to see you, albeit virtually. And thank you all for having me here tonight. I want to sincerely thank the organizers of Baltimore Sister Cities, Towson University Asian Arts and Culture Center, and the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs for putting this on. It's an honor really to be a part of tonight with you as we celebrate and recognize Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. In Baltimore, We celebrate the importance of cultural traditions, ancestry, languages, and unique experiences are represented among Baltimore's ethnic groups from Asia and the Pacific Islands. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have contributed in very visible and important ways in our city. As students, teachers, doctors, nurses, public service, business owners, everything, we know how deep and rich the culture is in Baltimore. And as you know, we here in Baltimore take pride in our diversity. It is one of the many and deepest strengths of our city. Our neighborhoods often reflects the patterns of migration of various immigrant groups who have settled in our city and continue to do so today. And as we recognize their achievements and contributions, we must also acknowledge the increased racism and xenophobia that Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have faced over the last year, something that I deeply condemn and will always stand up against. We will not allow anyone to be treated that way. One of the first documented Asian Americans to settle in Baltimore City were Chinese immigrants who came from the West Coast in the 1870s to escape persecution and discrimination after the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad. As a result, Baltimore's original Chinatown emerged on Marion Street and later moved to Park Avenue. Sadly, 150 years later, Asian Americans continue to face hate that is rooted in racism. Let me be clear. My administration has no tolerance for racially motivated acts of discrimination or hate crimes. We have to work to do much work to do to make Baltimore the welcoming city it aspires to be, and I remain committed to ensuring that city resources, services are accessible and inclusive of all Baltimoreans, regardless of race, country of origin, ethnic background, immigrant status, religious background, or language. Again, the diversity of us all, the diversity of Baltimoreans is our strength. That is why at the beginning of my administration, I appointed Baltimore's first chief equity officer to ensure city government operates through a framework of equity. And we are glad to have Chief Dana Moore here tonight. I know you'll be hearing from her and her history and understanding of this issue in particular. In addition, my administration is working to ensure investments in language resources to eliminate inequitable access to resources due to language barriers, and will be expanding capacity to work with AAPI communities. Finally, as we recover from the pandemic and we can now see the finish line, my administration is committed to building an inclusive and equitable economy in Baltimore. As we build a safer, functioning, and equitable city, let us all remember our history and the potential of this great city. Remember all the great things that we accomplished together, but also let us not forget all of the horrible things that happened so that we cannot make those and allow ourselves to make those mistakes again. Baltimore was formed by the hands of people from all over the world. Let's continue to do that as we build Baltimore to be the best version of itself. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. I cannot tell you how much we appreciate you being here and to hear and understand your full commitment. So thank you so much. Thank you. Teresa?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Scott. So without further ado, we will now, I don't know if I should reintroduce you, Linda. Take yourself off mute. Our first speaker will be Linda Kato.
Okay. I apologize. I'm still getting used to this Zoom webinar approach. I wanted to thank, first of all, the sponsors of the webinar presentation today and all the panelists, and for inviting me. I feel very honored, and all the people who are participating tonight. I am going to provide a brief overview of data concerning the state of Asians in the US and in Maryland as background for this panel. A key source of my data is the May 2021 report that just came out at Pew Research Center. It analyzed US Census data of respondents who identified as Asians only and then followed up with them with a subset of the respondents asking about their experiences of anti-Asian racism during the pandemic. Dr. Ruiz, the report author, gave me permission to present some of his slides today. I also refer to the report published by the Stop AAPI Hate, a national coalition to address anti-AAPI racism across the US. I also have a bit of a caveat. In Hawaii and US territories such as Guam, Pacific Islanders are categorized together with Native Americans as indigenous persons. But here in the continental US, federal and state governments typically combine them with Asians as AAPI. This has important consequences. For instance, both Native Americans and Pacific Islanders have high rates of COVID infection and deaths. But Pacific Islanders in the continental US have not benefited from special COVID healthcare programs for Native Americans because they fall under the category as Asians. Here in Maryland, those self-reported as Pacific Islanders in the US Census comprise only a very small fraction of 1% of the state population. The Pew Research that I cite, I apologize, refers to only to Asians in the census data. And while the Stop AAPI Hate report does include Pacific Islanders. So on to the data. About 80% of those surveyed Asian Americans by Pew said violence against them is increasing. Note that the Pew researchers emphasized that if they had included in their survey respondents those who didn't speak English as a second language, but didn't speak English, this rate would probably be a lot different, it'd probably be a lot higher. They only surveyed those who could speak English in this round. Every day, you have likely noted that reports of anti-Asian racist incidents across the US are appearing. The report by AAPI Hate, Stop AAPI Hate, shows that a wide range of anti-Asian racist incidents were reported to their website, but it's not just physical violence. But however, these are not any less hurtful and intimidating. Being shunned in the workplace or by sales associates in stores and restaurants, being spat at, receiving racist catcalls outside when we're walking around, or through an online harassment. These are scary and they're very disheartening. And I speak to these myself from personal experience. Survey respondents attributed the surge primarily to being scapegoated for COVID and also to the perception of race baiting being encouraged by the Trump administration. However, as many of you know, anti-Asian racism in the US is not new. In the mid-19th century, Asians primarily from China and Japan joined the millions around the world who came to the West Coast in response to the 1849 gold rush and to build the Transcontinental Railroad. Asians were promptly met with virulent racism and violence from politicians, labor unions, business groups, farmers, and even churches because they were viewed as economic competitors and ultimately for not being white. Asians were scapegoated for social ills and economic downturns. Like African Americans, white mobs regularly attacked and destroyed Asian businesses and neighborhoods and lynched their residents on lampposts and trees. However, prejudice against Asians was and continues today to be unique in that no matter how many generations we live in the US and even fight in the US military for this country, we are still associated with our ancestral nations of origin and viewed suspiciously as potential traitors. In 1882, all immigration from China and then from all of Asia in general was prohibited. Asian immigrants could not seek naturalizations for US citizenship until 1952, and until 1898, their US-born children were excluded from the constitutional right to birthright citizenship. During World War II, 120,000 Americans of Japanese ancestry, including my family, were stripped of their constitutional rights and property and imprisoned in internment camps for the duration of the war. In the 1965 Immigration Act finally replaced exclusionary immigration rules with immigration quotas for every nation around the world. This dramatically shifted immigration away from favoring European nations. We are now almost at historic highs of the late 19th century in the immigrant share of the US population. This time though, the immigrants are almost all from Latin America, Asia, and Africa. It is no wonder that white nationalist groups are so anxious about the so-called browning of the US population. Furthermore, Asians are projected to become the largest immigrant group in the US by 2065, surpassing Hispanics. It is critical for governments and communities to educate themselves about Asians in our midst to prevent more anti-Asian backlashes. Such actions are particularly important because Asians are now living all over the United States, not just in certain states and municipalities. Folks just can't help run into us, I'm sorry. Currently, the states seeing the greatest increase in their Asian populations are North and South Dakota. In 2019, 6.7% of Marylanders described themselves to the US Census as Asians. They tend to be clustered in several counties, with Howard County and Montgomery County at the top. At the municipal level, the most Asian cities are Rockville and Gaithersburg in Montgomery County, of which are quickly approaching a quarter of their population as being Asian. And the next is College Park and Prince George's County at 14%. The countries and cultures from which Asian immigrants have come now also reflect the huge diversity of Asia itself. Contradicting the stereotype of being the model minority, there is significant poverty among Asians in the US. Asians have the highest income inequality within their racial and ethnic group. On the high end are mostly those who came to the US with H-1 visas sponsored by corporations for their high skills. However, on the low end of education and income are those who came primarily as refugees seeking fleeing economic and political upheavals. For instance, from Myanmar, Mongolia, Nepal, and Pakistan. They desperately need social service supports and education access. These must be geared towards a vast array of language and dialects. Finally, the number and share of Asian Americans as eligible voters are at a historic high. They made a critical difference earlier this year in efforts in Georgia to flip the US Senate. In voter education outreach and polling efforts, it is important to note that most are naturalized US citizens and English is the second language. Consider the many different languages and dialects this may involve in your localities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. And we're going to move on to our next panelist because we do have a number of panelists and we want to hear from all of us. So next we're going to have Christina Poi, who is the Administrative Director of Maryland Governor's Commission on Asian and Pacific American Affairs and South Asian American Affairs. Christina was appointed by Governor Hogan in September 2015 as the Administrative Director of the Governor's Commission on Asian Pacific American Affairs and the Governor's Commission on South Asian American Affairs, which are a part of the Governor's Office of Community Initiatives. And she's a third generation Maryland native. So welcome, Christina.
Thank you. I'm so excited to celebrate Asian Pacific American Heritage Month with you and share information about where I work and how it relates to why I'm speaking today. Okay. Now it seems that, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, all right. So the ethnic commissions in the Governor's Office of Community Initiatives, there are 7 of them, 7 ethnic commissions with 115 commissioners. And we advise the Governor Hogan on the needs of Marylanders with over 40% of Maryland's total population. Now, I just want to point out that Maryland is the only state to have a separate Asian Pacific American Commission and a South Asian American Commission. The Asian Pacific American Commission covers those from East Asia, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific Islands and Native Hawaiians. And the South Asian American Commission covers those from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Nepal, Bhutan. And Asian American Pacific Islanders are the fastest growing population in the US. So some of the different events are listed here that the Asian Pacific American and South Asian American Affairs Commissions celebrate with Governor Hogan and First Lady Yumi Hogan, who is the first Asian American First Lady of Maryland. She also happens to be the first Korean American First Lady. Now, before I go too much further, I wanted to express my appreciation to Mayor Scott and the Baltimore Sister Cities for inviting me to participate in your program. So why do we celebrate Asian Pacific American Heritage Month across the nation? And why do we celebrate in May? I'm going to start with my family story. Like many Americans, I'm the descendant of an immigrant, and perhaps to some, a perpetual foreigner, even though I'm the fourth daughter of the eldest son of the eldest son of a younger son from the village scholar in Canton, China. It was my great-grandfather, Wong who came to America in the late 1890s with the dream of building a home for his family, not as a second son, but as an American. And now some of you may be aware of the surge in anti-Asian hate racism occurring across our country. The anti-Asian incidents, including brutal acts of violence being coughed on, hypersexualization and dehumanization of Asian women, vandalism of businesses, as well as verbal and physical harassment have exponentially increased over the past year. But racism and discrimination against Asian Americans, it's not anything new in American history. Looking back at the historical photo of the Golden Spike of the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad on May 10th, 1869, there was not a single Chinese laborer, nor a foreman, because there were foremen who were Chinese, was pictured, even though more than 12,000 of the workers were from Southern China, and as many as 20,000 in the total. Now, 6 years later, after that photo, the Page Act of 1875 became the first restrictive federal immigration law in the US, banning specifically Chinese women from immigration. This law was named after its sponsor, Horace Page. And he introduced it as the end of the danger of cheap Chinese labor and immoral Chinese women. And it was technically a way to bar immigrants seen undesirable. With this act, single women could not immigrate, and Chinese wives were subject to intense scrutiny and screening examinations in Hong Kong. And then again, the same questions were asked in different orders and over to prove the veracity of their married status to a Chinese in the US, and that their husbands could afford to support them in the US. And to the left is a picture of my grandmother when she came over, and she had to go through this intense examination through Angel Island. My grandmother on my father's side came in through Ellis Island. Now, after 7 years later, the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 specifically banned Chinese laborers from entering the US and prohibited Chinese immigrants already living in the US from becoming citizens. This was the first time our country banned the immigration of of a group of people solely based on race. So my great-grandfather, Wong was able to enter the US not as a laborer, but as a merchant, bringing in business and revenue with him. He worked hard, saved up, and sent money home for my great-grandmother, Li Chuanoi, to join him in Baltimore with their son, James, my grandpa. And she was only able to do so in 1916 after an intense examination at Ellis Island. Together, they owned the Hop Long grocery store on Park Avenue. And my great-grandmother became known as the neighborhood healer. Now, unfortunately, in 1926, Wong Wing-Wah died early from a stroke, leaving Li Chuan-oi, a widow with 3 children. She was a member of the aristocracy in China, and her feet were bound at a tender age as a symbol of wealth and status. Her toes were curled over so that her small steps and swaying hips would occur when she walked with the lotus flower gait. Here's a picture of my great-great-grandmother Li in China. With her bound feet, you can see the little pointy shoes at the bottom there. But being crippled by this custom and unable to communicate in English, Li Chuanoi was housebound and unable to seek work. She took in boarders and later bankrolled a restaurant that her 17-year-old son Kirby operated. He took the orders, cooked, and served the food and managed the till. My father, who was also born in Baltimore, went to live with his grandmother when he was 7 years old so that he could run errands for her. His 17-year-old Uncle Kirby made him do his homework, took him to his first baseball game, and it was during this time when it wasn't good to be different, to stand out. So they spoke English outside of the home, and they dressed in American clothes. Here's some pictures of my father growing up. And after college, my father served in the US Army and used the GI Bill to go to law school. When he was called for an appointment to visit a potential apartments, he was told over the phone that there were several available units. But when he showed up, he was told there were no more vacancies. When he called again and a couple of days later, he was asked again, "Oh, would you like to view the available apartments?" Clearly, this is a civil rights violation today, but discrimination was pretty common back then. Now, there are other examples of injustices against Asian Americans that include the internment of Japanese American families during World War II, as earlier mentioned, even as the segregated Japanese American unit, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, served while their families were incarcerated. Now, this unit is distinguished as the most decorated unit for its size and length of service in the entire US military history. And then there's the 1982 killing of Vincent Chin, a Chinese American engineer who was beaten with a baseball bat after his bachelor's party by two auto workers because they thought he was Japanese. And the brutal attacks on Muslims and Sikh Americans after September 11th, and the vandalism of their temples and their gurdwaras. And here's a photo of me with the legendary activist and photojournalist, Uncle Corky Lee, whose photos will live on forever. Incited by the historical Golden Spike Transcontinental Railroad completion picture's lack of Chinese in it, he became an activist. He organized a vigil in front of Vincent Chin's killers and recorded events in Asian American political history. Corky sought to document and re-educate us with the inclusion of Asian Americans in US history. With his photography, he even restaged the photo of the Golden Spike with American-born descendants of Chinese railroad workers to reclaim history. He very unfortunately passed away from COVID-19, even as he was concerned about the rise in anti-Asian hate sentiment. Rest in power, Uncle Corky, the undisputed, unofficial Asian American photographer laureate. Now, after the 1976 US bicentennial celebration, my godmother, Jeannie Jew, was frustrated with Asian Pacific Americans not being included in the recognized communities of the celebration. Like the Transcontinental Railroad photo, we were left out again. And Jeannie was spurred to change that. Her own great-grandfather, M.Y. Lee, contributed to the building of the Transcontinental Railroad, and he later became a prominent businessman in California. So during the period of anti-Asian, anti-Chinese sentiment in the 1800s, he went to support workers in solidarity, and he was killed in Oregon during the protests of a lynching of a Chinese laborer. As a congressional staffer—
30 seconds.
Okay, thank you. Jeannie started a nationwide advocacy campaign with the help of Congressman Frank Horton's administrative assistant, Ruby Moy. They helped May become celebrated as Asian Pacific American Heritage Month nationally in 1990 to commemorate the arrival of the first Japanese Americans in May 1843 and to honor the contributions of Chinese Americans in building the Transcontinental Railroad. So today we observe Asian Pacific American Heritage Month to recognize the contributions that generations of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have made in American history, society, and culture. And we honor the perseverance of those who came with a dream of being an American, achieving a better life, and leaving a legacy of economic and workforce development, scientific and medical innovation, as well as fashion, food, and cultural impact on our daily lives. And US Representative Horton said at the 1992 congressional hearing, Mrs. Jew turned a personal tragedy in her family history into a positive force. So I think that's something that we all can look at today amidst the xenophobia and anti-Asian hate. And we can rally together and unite. I believe that through civic activism, leadership, representation in government and business, education, and acceptance of both diversity and inclusion, a unified approach of standing together, not just as Asian Americans, but all Americans, regardless of race, color, nationality, religion, gender, citizenship status, that we can triumph darkness with light, overcome hate with love, and embrace differences. The Governor's Commissions on Asian Pacific American Affairs and South Asian American Affairs stand united in solidarity with the commissioners of the GOCI's ethnic commissions against anti-Asian hate, religious intolerance, discrimination against LGBTQ, and racism. Black Lives Matter and science is real. After all, we're all human and we all bleed the same color, red, regardless of the music we move to, the food we eat, the clothes we wear, the prayers we make, and the languages we speak. Asian American Heritage Month is a wonderful month of sharing our heritage, the diversity of our traditional customs, food, and culture through demonstrations and performances, but it's also about the recognition of our continued contribution to American history and society despite the political rhetoric, the bamboo ceiling, the lack of representation in primary education and in Hollywood until recently, and the ridiculous notion that I'm a fetish or a disease. I am American. I'm the descendant of immigrants who came from China over 100 years ago for a better future like so many other Americans. Thank you for listening to my family's American story and why Asian Pacific American Heritage Month is so important to us. And now I'd like to present the Governor's Proclamation for Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. And it reads, from the Governor of the State of Maryland, Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, May 2021, whereas the state of Maryland is deeply enriched by the diversity of its residents and seeks to further promote acceptance and equality of opportunities for all. And Asian Pacific American Heritage Month was first celebrated in May 1990 to commemorate the arrival of the first Japanese immigrants in the United States in May 1843, and to honor the contributions of Chinese Americans in building the Transcontinental Railroad completed in 1869. And whereas Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders continue to make impressive and lasting contributions to every facet of society in our state, now therefore I, Lawrence J. Hogan Jr., Governor of the State of Maryland, do hereby proclaim May 2021 as Asian Pacific American Heritage Month in Maryland and do commend this observance to all of our citizens. It is signed by Governor Larry Hogan, Lieutenant Governor Rutherford, and Secretary of State Wilbon-Smith. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you very much for participating. So again, we have a lot of panelists to get through. So now we're going to move on to our third panelist, who is Mark Chang, who is a delegate for the 32nd District, I guess, of Anne Arundel County. Mark Chang has been a member of the House of Delegates since January 14th, 2015, and he is currently Vice Chair of the Appropriations Committee and works as a consultant for manufacturing, technology, and defense companies. So I'm going to hand the mic over to you now, Delegate Chang.
Thank you very much, Nerissa, and good evening, everyone. And I hope everybody's having a wonderful Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. This is a wonderful way to celebrate, and thank you to the Baltimore Sister Cities and the City of Baltimore and all the panelists and all the organizers who have helped have this event this evening. And it's important to have this event. It shows a reflection of the great diversity that we have in the City of Baltimore and the State of Maryland. And personally, I'm really thankful to be able to be part of this. The City of Baltimore has been interwoven in my family's life throughout my lifetime, and we really much appreciate the City of Baltimore and how we have benefited and been able to engage and be part of the society of the American dream. In 1970, my parents came over here, they immigrated, and my mother, she was a student at the University of Maryland School of Medicine in downtown Baltimore, and then worked for several years over at the University of Maryland Medical Center. And my brothers and sisters were also born there. So we were born in Baltimore, and being right there in downtown of the flagship medical center of our great state, we really were able to see firsthand about the wonderful healthcare system that we have. And as a congenital heart patient, I grew up on that campus and would spend many nights there as a child, but also throughout my lifetime have been on the campus many times and have seen the healthcare system of our state really grow. And it's good to see that we have the University of Maryland Medical System, shock trauma, and all the other parts of our healthcare system really flourishing and providing world-class healthcare to our state. And also the rest of the world sees the great healthcare system that we have. And that's the important part of, one of the important reasons why we have the Sister Cities program, is because it's really able to build goodwill, but also shared experiences and shared ways of being able to promote a better world all around. In the 1980s, my father, he had a small business and a restaurant, a Korean restaurant in the basement of the Howard Hotel. Now it's where the light rail runs through, but at that time it was a Korean restaurant there, and it was a pretty hopping area. A lot of the locals would come over there and grab bite to eat in the basement of the Howard Hotel. I'm not sure what's there anymore. It's really kind of, I think, part of the comprehensive revitalization area that is in it for the future. But it was really enjoyable times. I remember being right there and going over to the Civic Center and going to Inner Harbor. And that was really neat. And in the 90s, then my parents had small businesses on Greenmount Avenue and over in the west side of town, over on West Preston Street. They had a business over there. So really have been able to see firsthand the fabric and the really cool, charming culture of the city of Baltimore, from the north, south, east and west and central downtown part of the great city. And I started off actually my college career over Morgan State University. So really enjoyed my time there and the program, and to really see how Morgan has really become a world-class leader amongst our HBCUs, but also just in colleges and universities in general across the country. And this is all really part of the greatness that we have in the state and the investments that we're making from the Maryland General Assembly and also the administration in the city of Baltimore, because a lot of good things happen. And I think sometimes they may be overlooked, but tonight definitely reflects the wonderful attributes of the city and how the Asian American Pacific Islander community is part of that story, and how the city of Baltimore is part of our story. I first was introduced to politics in the 1980s when the Korean Society of Maryland had their office on North Avenue and cross-secting Charles Street, North Charles Street. And so that office was there, and there was a lot of opportunity for the Korean American community to be involved in political engagement. The office is no longer there. They sold that property in the late 2000s, but then at that time it was again a place where the local city politicians or statewide politicians would come over and meet with members of the Korean American community, and it was a way for us to be engaged. And I still remember vividly those times of having those opportunities to be able to be exposed to public service and the importance of what it means to be engaged as voters and as citizens and also participants of the state. So thank you so much for allowing us the opportunity to come out and speak and share our story, and look forward to the rest of the evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Delegate Chang. And it's everybody is really complimenting the panel on incorporating your personal stories and your family stories. And I think that's important to our theme, that when it comes down to it, we are Americans, we are diverse, we've been diverse since the beginning. And those who have been different have throughout this history faced discrimination. And it's really time to come together as Americans and appreciate people's history and move forward with that. But I can't talk that much because we have panelists to get to. So Dana Petersen Moore, you're up next, who is the Baltimore City Chief Equity Officer, and you have two jobs. You're doing a lot of work there. Director of Baltimore's Office of Equity and Civil Rights. And you are the first Chief Equity Officer appointed by Brandon Scott, Mayor Scott, to dual roles, so that I just mentioned. And your mission is to establish frameworks within every city agency, board, commission that will assure compliance with Baltimore's equity laws and their equity laws and mandates. You have a big job. I hope you can squeeze it down to 10 minutes. Sorry, it's so short, but we're all looking forward to hearing from you. So again, welcome, Dana.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me and for inviting me and making sure that I am included. This has been wonderful. I have just been completely enthralled with everyone's stories. I'll start by telling you that I live 2 blocks from Greenmount Avenue in Baltimore's Charles Village neighborhood. There are still some AAPI businesses on Greenmount Avenue. Anyone who's listening, Herman's Discount is one of my favorite places. We will probably go there tomorrow because my husband tells me supplies for our bathroom and they have everything. So it is still very thriving. A little bit about my personal story. My career is fairly well known, but what people don't know a lot about me is that my place of very first memory is Kaneohe, Hawaii. My father was a fighter pilot in the Marine Corps and he was stationed there. So when I first became aware of really people outside of my family and art and culture, that happened in Hawaii. My first teacher was Mrs. I, who was, I believe, a native Hawaiian. Our favorite candy was the sesame rice paper candy. And we used to walk around our neighborhood. We never wore shoes. I don't recall having the tops of my big toe because they were always being stubbed off, but we would chew seaweed and explore. Our very rugged neighborhood in Kaneohe was very new. So our house was filled with, artwork that my father collected on his travels. He loved Japan. He spent a lot of his career in Japan and Korea. I have things in my office that are my father's, things that he touched every day that are from Japan. And it's just part of my world. My father died in 2015. His funeral was at the Naval Academy. And when we went to the reception, the most impressive, oversized floral arrangement was from the Korean embassy. And I still have the ribbon, the red, it's very profound, the red, white, and blue ribbons that they included in that arrangement. And they had red, white, and blue flowers. And it is very significant. And I guess I'm just now it's really hitting me. The significance of that is that and the Korean embassy, they are part of America. They are part of us. We are all connected, very much so. And so it is very profound to me what is happening here in Baltimore and across the country to our Asian American Pacific Islander brothers and sisters. And the mayor is right, it is not tolerable. It is not. And there are things that we can do. And that's why he asked me to take the position that I'm taking. He appointed a chief equity officer because he very firmly believes, and I agree, obviously, that Baltimore must be equitable, not more equitable, equitable. And so it is my job to instill that. I'm also the director of the Office of Equity and Civil Rights, and that is an office that has been in existence for about 30 years. So I've acquired that office and a staff, and we exist to really do 5 things. We are one office, but there are 5 boards and commissions that are part of that office. They are the Civilian Review Board, the Community Relations Commission, the Equity Division, the Mayor's Commission on Disabilities, and the Wage Commission. And I just put them in alphabetical order. That's not the order in which they came to the office. We're at 7 East Redwood Street. We do, well, pre-COVID, we took walk-in complaints. Now you really need to make an appointment, but it's very sporadic. So you can check us out at www.civilrights.baltimorecity.gov. Also, there was a question, what to do if you experience discrimination. Let me give that now. You can call us at 410-396-3141. Our offices, our telephone lines are staffed 24/7. At any time, you can call and make a complaint or leave information. And we have a very good team that will follow up and make sure that your concerns are heard. So the question was, what discrimination laws does the city follow? They've turned the heat off in my building. It's about 80 degrees in here right now. I know, so well. So of course we follow all federal, state, and Baltimore City laws. That is a given. My office in particular, Christina Foy talked about her father trying to rent an apartment and showing up and being told, oh, no, there are none. That still happens. That happens, with regularity, and it is absolutely against the law. My office handles those kinds of fair housing complaints. And because of COVID, there's been an increase in fair housing complaints with people being unlawfully forced to leave their apartment, not given fair treatment, not given the benefits of the protections that exist now, particularly in these times. So we have a unit that really focuses on fair housing discrimination, and that's our Community Relations Commission. They also handle employment discrimination concerns. The Mayor's Commission on Disabilities is sort of a subset of the CRC. They really are focused on accessibility issues, sign language, mobility, access to buildings, access to streets and sidewalks, educating others about what the accessibility laws and rules are. And we do get complaints for violations of those laws. The Wage Commission. The Wage Commission is getting to be more and more known, but this is such an important commission, very important work. We enforce the city's wage laws. There is a minimum wage law that all employers are required to pay, but some don't. And when that happens, we want to know about it so that we can do something about it. We take those cases, we investigate them thoroughly. And if it's turns out that, yes, the employer is not paying a fair wage, we will collect the monies that are due, make sure that compensation goes to those that have been injured, and we impose penalties. I smile when I say that, but that is our job. We do impose penalties and we collect them. We really do mean business. The Civilian Review Board is part of my office. The Civilian Review Board has oversight over the Baltimore Police Department, the Baltimore Sheriff's Office, the school police, as well as the police department for Morgan State University, and I think one other. But if there are issues of police violence or improper treatment by the police department or members of law enforcement, those complaints can come to my office and we will investigate, convene a panel, and if the claim is substantiated, again, the process will continue and penalties could be imposed. The Equity Division is the newest division, and we are here to, as I said at the beginning, to enforce the equity laws and to make Baltimore equitable, but we also have oversight over the city's legislation that mandates that every city agency have an equity coordinator. I'm very pleased to say, and you can see this on our website, that absolutely every city agency has its own equity coordinator, and they are doing great work right within their agencies. A number of agencies have equity plans. They're all a little different. My job is to eventually have one plan for the whole city, so I will be getting that done. The other part of the law is that we have to make sure that the agencies are carrying out their functions with an equity lens and participate in an annual equity assessment. And I was reminded that I needed to make sure that I shared with you all that the equity assessment tracks agencies' language access plans. And this is important because 1/3 of the immigrants in our city are limited English proficient, and approximately 2,000 speak Korean and Mandarin. And we make sure that people are able, we want, It's not happening yet. It's going to happen across all of our agencies. There will be language access programs. My office also, for those of you who were watching all the press conferences that were happening because of COVID, all through 2020, and they're still happening, the sign language speakers that were at those were made possible through the works of my office. So it's pretty busy. I've talked about there's other things you can do if you have discrimination experience. Obviously call my office 410-396-3141. I feel like I'm selling, but I want to make sure you have that number. So please jot it down. But you can also reach out to the Equal Employment, the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, or the State of Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. And there are quite a few advocacy organizations throughout Baltimore, throughout the state of Maryland. The one we think of the most, I think, is the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union. But there are quite a few others, and really think about what it is, what's the root cause of the discrimination, and you will find an advocacy organization to help you. Anyone who needs help, again, call us, and we will help you, or we will match you with an advocacy organization that can.
30 seconds.
Oh, I got 30 seconds. Okay. So you very much helped me, Teresa, by sharing what my mission is in the equitable distribution of resources. So let me just jump to how you all can be involved if you want, and I hope that you do. I am now in the process of trying to staff all of the boards and commissions in my office. I would like to know from you if you are interested in serving on one of our boards or commissions, or if you know someone who does. I believe that we have to walk in our faith, and we have to be genuine in what we do. So our boards and commissions need to be better diversified. I could use your help in making that happen. I want to know if you know of instances of inequity that you've experienced with a city agency. I want to know that right away. Don't wait. Get in touch with me so that I can do something about it. And if you have ideas on how I can do my job better, I would love to know that. And I guess the last way you can help me is keep doing things like this. The more we talk, the more we get together, the more we share, the better we are. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And just so you know, Dana, that Rachel has been putting all the information you've been giving out into the chat. And this is also being recorded and will be on YouTube. And the people who are here will have a chance, will get an email, so they can always go back and listen to you again and get the information they may have missed, because you gave a lot of information there, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
For all you do. So we're up to our last panelist, of course, but not the least. And this is Nerissa Paglinauan. Did I say it right? Close? And she's another child of the Charm City, actually. So we have a number of people here who are actually born in Baltimore, but she's born from Filipino immigrants. And she's in her 9th year as program manager of the Asian Arts and Culture Center, where she engages audiences in cross-cultural dialogue through diverse exhibitions and programs, including, so you have to check this out, you have to plug this, the annual Asia North Exhibition and Festival. So welcome, welcome to the panel.
Thank you, Teresa. It's so wonderful to be here with all of you. Thank you for the invitation from the Baltimore Sister Cities to be on this panel, and to, it's been really wonderful hearing all the stories and all the diverse stories from this group about all of our experiences here in Baltimore and Maryland. And I just feel so honored and humbled to be on this panel, and grateful to all of the attendees for showing up and showing their support, because it means a lot that these issues matter to you. And so the more that we do this and hear stories and build bridges of understanding, it's just so important right now. and it's so important to my work at the center. So yes, as I said, I'm grateful to have this platform to share a bit of my experience as an AAPI, as a Filipino American, growing up in Baltimore, as well as my perspective on a bit of the local AAPI arts and culture scene. As mentioned, I'm the program manager at Towson University's Asian Arts and Culture Center, also referred to as AA&CC. But before I delve into the center's work of engaging the community in cross-cultural dialogue, I think it best to share my personal history and experience that has contributed to my perspective. And my perspective does come from a place of privilege. I'm a second-generation Filipino-American born in Towson. Visitors to the AA&CC have often asked me where I'm from, and I'm quick to respond, well, I was born right next door. As it happens, the hospital where I was born, St. Joe's, is located right next door to Towson University's Center for the Arts, home of the Asian Arts and Culture Center. And I am going to share my first slide. I brought some, family photos to share. Oh, I did that out of order. I should be used to doing these Zoom sharing. We've done a lot of programs, virtual programs with the AA&CC, and I'm used to being behind the scenes, but not presenting my own. So let me see if I can go back. Okay, I will share desktop 2. And oh no, that didn't work. Okay.
It looked like it worked.
Oh, it did? Okay.
We could see the photos, look like family photos.
Okay, let me try that one more time. And share. Okay, I think that worked.
It did.
So my parents, Doctors Chodolo and Wilhelmina Paglinauan, immigrated to the United States as part of the brain drain wave of Filipino doctors, nurses, scientists, and engineers after the passing of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965. They met in Baltimore, went on dates to see the Orioles play at Memorial Stadium on 33rd. As my dad explained, it was a cheap date back then. And they were married in 1969. Some of my earliest memories included thinking my sister's name was ate, the Tagalog word for older sister. Unfortunately, that was one of the few Tagalog words I picked up. Our parents never spoke Tagalog to me or my sister, nor did we learn my mom's Ilocano dialect or my dad's Bicolano dialect. In case you didn't know, there are approximately 180 spoken languages and dialects in the Philippines. My parents would always speak to each other in Tagalog at the dinner table, sometimes Taglish, which is a mix of Tagalog and English, but always in English to me and my sister, unless there was swearing involved, and I won't try to repeat what I remember. My sister Christina and I were lucky, very lucky, to grow up among many first and second generation Filipino Americans in Baltimore County. It was very much like an extended family. I would address my parents' Filipino friends as Tito and Tita, or uncle and auntie, as a sign of respect and familiarity. The other Filipino American kids felt like cousins, or even felt as close as sisters and brothers. After Sunday Mass was like a big Filipino social hour outside of the church when all the Filipino families would greet each other and catch up for the week. And there were many parties at each other's homes with tons of Filipino food, tons of chismis, which is gossip, and raucous laughter. You will see in this old photo that half my preschool class was Filipino American. At the time, I didn't think there was anything particularly remarkable about that. That's just the way it was. But I understand now what a strong impact that had on my sense of self, my identity, and what it meant to be Filipino American. From an early age, I felt comfortable in my skin. And I will reiterate that this is my own experience, and I can't possibly speak for the experiences of my Filipino American contemporaries in this photo. At any rate, I felt represented by what I saw around me every day at that young age. But moving on to larger schools with less diversity, and being exposed to various art forms and media that did not have that same kind of representation, I became much more aware of being a part of a minority population. Of course, I still embraced American popular culture, the sitcoms of the 80s and 90s, despite the lack of diverse representation. I fell in love with Western classical music, choral music, indie rock and folk music, studio art, most anything that had to do with the arts, much to my parents' chagrin, who expected either me or my sister to become doctors and take over their private practice in over at the Golden Ring Medical Center. But you know, as it goes, I am an arts administrator now, and hopefully they understand by now what I do. And my sister is actually the co-rector at Church of the Redeemer in Baltimore. So I think we did okay. So I proactively engaged with it. So going back to being exposed to a world that didn't have that diversity that I had in my preschool. I had to proactively engage with the groups that I felt represented who I was and helped keep me connected to my cultural roots. Through the Katipunan Filipino American Association of Maryland, I had the opportunity to learn and perform some of the traditional folk dances that truly demonstrated the diverse influences on Philippine culture, from the Spanish influenced folk dances to the indigenous tribal dances. And let me see if I can share one more time. Did that work? Give a shout out. Yes? Okay. So hopefully you're seeing an image from, I think that would have been 1988. I know Katipunan just celebrated their 50th anniversary last year. So I was exposed to, I was able to learn about our cultural heritage and just have this kind of constant grounding of my cultural roots, my history. And it was very important to, my sense of Filipino identity, and that it was something to be proud of. So in college, I sought out the Filipino Cultural Society student group during my sophomore year, as I definitely missed out on that familial feeling during my freshman year in college. CS was proud to represent our Filipino heritage through cultural events on the Towson University campus, as well as at district conferences of the Filipino Intercollegiate Networking Dialogue, or FIND. So the underlying theme here is that all these Filipino Americans had to create their own groups to be their own advocates and create their own platforms to connect with their peers and to elevate their voices and to amplify their perspectives. So I've been lucky and I've been privileged to have access to and be engaged with these groups over the course of my life. Of course, not all AAPIs have this kind of access and support, depending on where they live in this country. And with the growing anti-AAPI sentiments we see now, it is so important to give support to those groups that do elevate our AAPI voices and perspectives, and to reestablish that this is our home too.
Now back to the place next door to where I was born. Marking its 50th anniversary this year, the Asian Arts and Culture Center at Towson University harnesses the powers of art and culture to combat prejudice, racism, and xenophobia, increase the visibility of Asian and AAPI stories and creativity, promote cultural dialogue and understanding, and illuminate what makes us one human family. Our exhibitions and programs promote cultural equity by moving Asia from the margins and viewing the world through the lenses of Asian and AAPI experiences. And so I feel lucky to be able to use my place of privilege to help amplify the voices of Asian artists, AAPI artists who don't always have the equal opportunities at expressing their arts, their voices, their creativity. So one, oh, that's another. So this year, or I should say that it was back 3 years ago, we started, we collaborated with the Central Baltimore Partnership to start Asian North and to bring together various community partners and celebrate the history of Baltimore's Charles North neighborhood as a historic Koreatown. And it also gave us the opportunity. So with this Asian Arts, or the Asian North Exhibition and Festival, each year, this being the third year, we've done a call out to artists in the Maryland, DC, and Virginia area, and really to create a network of all these AAPI artists and voices, and to see the diversity of their stories and know that, you know, we want to present their work and hear from them, that their voices matter. And it's all about seeing, you know, being represented in the media, in the arts, and, you know, amplifying those voices. And it's been wonderful, even through, especially now with the anti-Asian hate. I was able to, you know, we were able to still put on this art exhibit installation, physical installation in Station North, and also put it online for people who didn't feel comfortable going out into it, you know, among people, you know, depending on how comfortable they were in this part of the pandemic. But just being able to share all this artwork with diverse groups in the city, people coming together, and the arts really have a way of, you know, connecting across cultures. You know, even if there are language barriers, you know, visual art, music, it's kind of a universal language, and no matter, you know, you can always find some point of entry through the arts. And going back to the idea of supporting groups that amplify AAPI voices, I've definitely seen more groups coming out, like Asian Pacific Arts Collective, the Chinatown Collective, to really, you know, celebrate their cultures. And I know APAC was started because they didn't see representation in theater. And so that was one group that we were able to partner with recently, a production called Corn Kid that delved into AAPI mythology. So I also learned a lot about some Filipino mythology that I never knew about. And we, I can go back to this slide.
Nerissa, you have 30 seconds, so.
Okay, wow, that went fast. So, you know, I guess all that to say there is, you know, power in partnerships, in, you know, forming, you know, collaborating with groups to, you know, produce something like meaningful and produce cross-cultural awareness and understanding, and just opening the dialogue to prevent any like misunderstandings that are the root of, you know, hate and ignorance. And so it's been such, it's felt empowering to be able to come together with other groups, AAPI groups and other, you know, BIPOC groups in the city. And we're hoping to do more of intercultural dialogue in the future through the arts. And so that is, so I have to say that I love my job. I love what we do. I love the opportunity to, you know, meet all these artists and learn about their stories and find connections and learn something new. So thank you. And I hope that, so for we do have some online exhibits at the Asian Arts and Culture Center website. Go to towson.edu/AsianArts. And we do have an exhibit in the gallery right now that you can go check out. So I guess I'll end it there. Thank you so much for giving me the platform to share a bit about the AAPI art scene in Maryland.
Thank you very much. So thank you to all the panelists. Actually, I think it's been a very informative evening. I have a question for you also, but I do see there is one question right now. Please put your questions in the Q&A if you have any. And this one is specifically directed at Dana regarding your staffing and commissions. They want to know how to get in touch with you.
Thanks. So my cell phone, my office cell phone is 443-610-6761. My email is kind of long, but it's equity.danapmoore@baltimorecity.gov. You can also call the office, which is 410-396-3141, and let us know what you're interested in, and we'll take it from there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And this is the question. As I've been sitting here this evening, listening to you all share incredible stories. You know, these diversity months or history months are to bring awareness, right? It's not like we should limit it to that particular month. But when I'm hearing these stories, and as an African American, I'm thinking, how can people who are considered, have been considered in the past not good enough to be American, how can we work together? You mentioned BIPOC. And there was a time in the course of history, this is what's interesting, that they were after World War I, up until about World War II. And before that, from the 1900s, the whole idea of immigration comes from, to be honest, comes from the Constitution, and how immigration has been managed over the years, with 3/5 clause and not even considering Native Americans as eligible to be citizens. I don't know if they even really wanted to be citizens. But how do we work together? You're raising the awareness about your history. And I'm saying, well, that's very similar to some of the stories that I would tell, minus the, maybe that immigration at the beginning of the century. My family has been here a lot longer, but we have similar experiences with discrimination. And how can we begin to work together as Americans? Because there's strength in numbers. So that's what I want to kind of share with all the panelists here. You don't have to answer, you can think about it, get in touch with us later. I think it's a difficult question to think about. But that's what I kind of just want to throw out there to kind of begin a discussion possibly in the 15 minutes that we have left.
I'll start. So I think the first step is forums like this. Sister Cities has done a very good thing bringing us all together. And we, all of the panelists have very different backgrounds, but we all have something that connects us, be it Greenmount Avenue, you know, businesses that were established in Baltimore. Is it Delegate Chang, just hearing your story about all the time that you spent in Baltimore and in our hospitals. There's so much that connects us. There's more that binds us than divides us. And I think we have to create the forums to bring all of us together. There at one time was a very robust conversations that were happening between Blacks and Jews. And I think it was called the Blues, BLEWS. And I don't know if it still meets, but, you know, I spent time on the board of directors of the Elijah Cummings Youth Program in Israel. And that was established because we realized that there was so much in common between Blacks and Jews. And so it made no sense for us to be divided. And the same thing exists now. There's more that we have in common. What is happening to our Asian American brothers and sisters in terms of the violence, it happened to us. And and I don't mean to get preachy, speechy, but when we see that on TV, you cannot, there is no separation between what is happening now and what Blacks have been through. So we have to be the change we want to see. It's up to us to bring us all together. Mm-hmm. Let me go on mute for a minute.
Anybody else like and just to say, I mentioned this in a meeting, you know, when you think about the NAACP, it was founded by Jewish people, actually. People don't know that tidbit of history, that these groups worked together internationally to bring equity and equality. Equality was more the question of the day. Now we're more talking about equity. So is there anybody, and I have a few more, just anybody want to mention anything, because I do have some other questions here. If you all don't want to say anything, I can. Go ahead, Linda.
My family came to the U.S. in 1849, you know, with the gold rush. So they've been around for a while. I'm multiple generation out in California. But I think we Asians also have to educate our own people. I was involved with the civil rights movement, you know, and all of that, but and I experienced discrimination. We had segregated neighborhoods and so forth still in California in the 60s. But so many of the people who are coming over don't know the history and how important the African-American community was for the civil rights movement in the United States. And we, you know, these issues around access to universities and so forth, they're, you know, polarizing. And I have to keep educating members of my own community, including especially the younger ones, or those who are immigrants, that we owe a lot to the African-American community. And at the same time, I want to share with that we were also, when we were initially brought over, many people were enslaved. They came as slaves who were kidnapped from their country and brought over by slave traffickers. And they were put on auction blocks in San Francisco, right where Fisherman's Wharf is, you know, and they were stripped naked and they were publicly auctioned off to the highest bidder. And this was well after, you know, the Civil War and the emancipation and all that. We were not considered slaves. And I mentioned that about the lynchings and so forth as well. We have a common history, and we owe we really must collaborate with the African-American community as well with other groups. And I think as Asian American educator, that's my commitment, and that's where I think I start.
But it goes both ways also.
Yeah, I agree, but then I have to work on my group as well. You know? That's what I'm saying.
That's it. It goes both ways in terms of stereotypes and discrimination. And but I think that we really do need to raise awareness, like this forum is doing, and really work together. So I don't know if anybody else wants to contribute, because I do have a few questions here, and you can always go back to that question if you want to go talk about it later. But this is for it's you know, it looks like Nerissa, but it's Nerissa, right?
It's Nerissa, and I meant to point out on that picture from my first birthday on the birthday cake, I just noticed when I took a picture of that photo that my name is misspelled. Really? It's spelled on the cake as Niressa, and as you know, it's Nerissa. Okay. And with the Filipino accent, it's Nerissa. So Nerissa Paglinauan is my name.
It's beautiful.
Thank you.
Here's a question for you. Can you talk about a little more about the Baltimore art scene as a training ground and launching pad for AAPI artists and arts as a language for transcending barriers to cultural exchange and political dialogue?
So, wow. So there, I think something about the Baltimore art scene, it's just very open and welcoming to diverse voices. There isn't really this stuffy air about it, you know, and it's just conducive to, you know, different modes of expression. People, I think, especially, you know, artists in general, I feel like they're more willing to put themselves out there, you know, in Baltimore. It just, I feel like it's just, there's a willingness to collaborate. I heard some artists talk about how, you know, artists tend to support each other here, unlike maybe other art scenes across the country. Just different arts organizations are just so supportive of each other. So as you know, as they mentioned earlier about strength in partnership and strength in numbers. So that's where I see Baltimore as kind of a great kind of starting ground for AAPI artists and just for collaboration.
Yeah, they're not stuffy.
Not stuffy, for lack of a better word.
Yeah. So this question now goes to Dana Moore or Catalina from MIMA. Can you talk about what has been happening in Baltimore recently in terms of outreach to AAPI communities to offer protection and some fears and encourage reporting of racist incidents? Maybe people are scared to report them, or so that goes to both of you, I guess.
Yeah, do you want to take it over? No follow-up. Oh, I guess
That's you, Catalina. Yeah.
yes. I'll go ahead. Yes. So we are deeply concerned about what is happening nationally, but also in our city. I will say that as an office, as the Office of Immigrant Affairs, we work really hard with agencies to make sure that immigrants, in particular, limited English proficient immigrants, don't have any barriers related to their ability to speak English. So we work with the Office of Civil Rights, the police department, and really anyone to make sure that they have materials in the city's 5 core languages, which includes Korean and Chinese. We also provide training to employees to make sure that if someone's calling, they can be assisted in their language. And a couple of years ago, we worked with the police department to make sure that our officers are not asking about immigrant status or contacting ICE because of lack of their status.
That could be pretty scary for people. Yeah. Would you like to add anything, Dana, or?
I think Catalina has it covered, but we did convene meetings with the mayor, and we're paying attention.
One more thing I'll add, as of this week, we have additional capacity in MIMA, and we'll be announcing a position to work closely with AAPI community. So you'll be hearing from me. We know that that is a weakness of our office that we recognize. So we definitely want to pay attention to that. We're here to change systems that prevent immigrants from accessing services and resources.
Right.
And as the mayor mentioned, we want to be an inclusive city, and that takes resources.
Well, everything takes resources. That's the thing. So let's take it up to the state now. I'm going to direct this question. This will be the last question towards Mark and Christina. What is Maryland doing to address anti-AAPI attacks? How is Maryland addressing data collection regarding these attacks? And how can the public view this data, if it's even public?
With regards to legislature, each legislative session, the legislative body is looking ways to strengthen our hate crime laws. And a couple of years ago, I sponsored a bill that strengthened our hate crime laws in the state of Maryland that addressed hate symbols. Specifically, there were several incidents of nooses and swastikas that was placed around school campuses across the state and across our communities, and put that bill in, and the law passed, and it does, it strengthens that the law that if an individual is convicted of participating in those type of activities, that they would be considered a misdemeanor and also a fine associated with it. So those are the ways that we are each legislative session working on trying to strengthen our laws. With the recent focus on the Asian American Pacific Islander community, serving on the House Appropriations Committee, this past legislative session, we committed about $2 million to community centers for Asian American communities all across the state. And this is something we'll continue to work on. Recently, the governor announced the task force with regards to the Asian American hate, and that's being headed up by the former U.S. Attorney Robert Hur. So that's in the initial stages right now. And so we'll look forward to hearing about those findings in the near future.
Thank you. And where can we, is there anywhere we can go to look at that? Is it public or not yet? Like the information that you're collecting?
That probably is available through the agency of the Governor's Office of Crime Control and Prevention.
Okay, all right, thank you. And do you have anything to add, Christina?
Actually, Mark pretty much covered it, but I can also provide some other resources. I'll try to put them into the chat.
Okay, thank you. So, I mean, it's been a great webinar, and I really want to thank everybody for being here, providing their stories, and providing information. I think that's very important. And what we do hope is that through these platforms, that BSC webinars, we can continue to work together and find out ways that BSC can maybe assist or help with the promotion of what you're doing. So we plan to stay in contact with every one of you. And I will kind of ask our president, Jerry Bird, if she has anything to add. And don't forget, we will send you the link to the webinar that will be posted on YouTube. Jerry, do you want to add anything?
Well, yeah, I just really want to thank all of you tonight for joining us. I want to thank our special panelists for sharing all their stories so personally. It means so much to us, so much to all of us. I feel like the more we share and the more we build platforms like this, where we open our hearts, we build understanding in our community, right? We break down barriers and we learn not just tolerance, but profound respect. And I think that that's what it takes in order to create a beautiful, thriving, dynamic, cohesive environment with all of our cultures where we lock arms together. So I just want to say thank you guys so much for being here.
Yes, and you will be hearing from us. When? Hopefully soon, but you will be hearing back from the BSC, and we appreciate every one of you. So have a good evening, and we'll hope to see you. We hope to see you at our next webinar. So continue coming to them. Okay, thank you. Good night, everyone.
Good night, all.
Thank you. Good night.